The first time Elara Korven saw the Miller family homestead, its stone walls rising from the wheat fields like a promise she did not deserve, she thought about running. Marcus Irving had proposed to her 3 months earlier beside the creek that fed his mill, flour dust still ghosting his dark hair, his calloused hands trembling as he offered her a ring his grandmother had worn. She had said yes because she loved him with a fierceness that frightened her, because he looked at her green skin and small tusks and saw something beautiful, because when he kissed her, it felt like coming home to a place she had never known existed. But now, standing at the edge of his family's land with her travel bag clutched against her chest, Elara wondered if love would be enough when his mother saw what her son had chosen. "They will hate me," she said quietly. Marcus turned to her, his brown eyes soft with concern. He was not a tall man by human standards, perhaps 5 feet and 10 inches, broad through the shoulders from years of hauling grain sacks. Beside him, Elara stood only a few inches shorter, her build lean and athletic from a lifetime of work. "They will love you," he said with such certainty that she almost believed him. "You cannot know that. I know my mother." He took her free hand, lacing their fingers together. "I know my sisters. I know that they have been waiting to meet you since the day I told them about the woman who stole my good sense and all my peace." "That is what worries me," Elara said, but she let him lead her forward along the dirt road toward the farmhouse. She had prepared speeches for this moment. Careful words about gratitude and respect, apologies for being what she was, promises to make Marcus happy, despite her heritage. Every orc woman she knew who had married a human carried stories of cold welcomes and colder years, of families who tolerated but never accepted, of children caught between two worlds and belonging to neither. Elara had braided her black hair with particular care that morning, chosen her plainest dress, filed the points of her tusks until they barely showed past her lower lip. She had made herself as small and inoffensive as she knew how to be. The farmhouse door opened before they reached it. A woman emerged into the autumn sunlight, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 50 years old, her hair more silver than brown, her face weathered by sun and smiles. Behind her came 2 younger women, both with Marcus's dark hair and steady build, and a man about Marcus's age carrying a small child on his hip. Elara's rehearsed words dried up in her throat. She stopped walking, her feet suddenly rooted to the earth. Marcus's mother had to be his mother crossed the yard with surprising speed. Elara braced herself for inspection, for the careful once-over that would precede judgment, for the tight smile that would fail to reach human eyes. Instead, the woman opened her arms wide and pulled Elara into an embrace so fierce and warm that it knocked the air from her lungs. "Finally," Marcus's mother said against Elara's shoulder, holding her tight. "Finally, you are here. I have been waiting to meet the woman who made my son write poetry." Elara stood frozen, her arms hanging useless at her sides. The woman smelled of bread and herbs and something sweet Elara could not name. The embrace was real, solid, without hesitation or reservation. Elara's carefully constructed defenses crumbled. She started, but her voice broke. "Hush now," the woman said, pulling back just enough to cup Elara's face in both hands. "Look at you. Marcus said you were beautiful, but he has always been terrible with words. You are magnificent." She smiled, and the smile reached every part of her face, crinkling the corners of her eyes. "I am Judith Irving. Welcome to your family, sweetheart." Elara blinked rapidly, mortified to feel tears threatening. "I am Elara. I thank you. I did not expect—" "What? A welcome?" Judith laughed, a rich, warm sound. "What did my fool son tell you about us?" "He said you would be kind," Elara managed. "Kind." Judith shot Marcus a look of exaggerated disappointment. Kind, as if you were a traveling merchant we might offer tea. She turned back to Elara, taking her hand. You are going to be my daughter. I have 3 sons and only 2 daughters. I have been outnumbered for years. Come inside. The girls are dying to meet you. The 2 younger women had approached while their mother spoke. The taller one, who looked about 25, grinned at Elara with unrestrained curiosity. I am Margaret, she said, the sensible sister. This is Ruth. She indicated the shorter woman beside her, who appeared a few years younger. Ruth smiled shyly. Marcus has not stopped talking about you since spring. We were starting to think you might be imaginary. I assure you I am quite real, Elara said faintly. Good, Margaret said, because we already planned the wedding feast. If you had turned out to be a figment of his imagination, we would have been stuck with 3 roasted pigs and nowhere to put them. The man with the child stepped forward. I am David Irving, married to this troublemaker. He nodded at Margaret. This little monster is our son, Peter. The child, perhaps 2 years old, regarded Elara with solemn blue eyes. Hello, Peter, Elara said softly. Peter reached out one chubby hand toward her face. Margaret tensed slightly, but Elara held still as the child's fingers touched the tip of one of her small tusks with obvious fascination. Teeth, Peter announced. Yes, Elara said. Teeth. Different, Peter said thoughtfully. Very different, Elara agreed. Peter nodded as if this settled the matter entirely, then turned to demand that his father put him down so he could chase the chickens. Judith still held Elara's hand. Come, she said again. You must be exhausted from traveling. Marcus, bring her things inside. Girls, set another place for dinner. David, make sure your son does not terrorize those poor birds. The next hour passed in a blur of warmth and noise that left Elara dizzy. The farmhouse was large and well kept, its rooms full of comfortable furniture and the evidence of lives well lived. Judith showed Elara to a bedroom on the 2nd floor, chattering the whole time about wedding plans and whether and how pleased she was that Marcus had finally found someone who could tolerate his singing. He gets it from his father, Judith said, smoothing the quilt on the bed. Terrible voice, but such enthusiasm. You have to admire the confidence. I like his singing, Elara said before she could stop herself. Judith beamed. Then you are truly meant for each other. She sobered slightly, her eyes kind. You were afraid to come here. It was not a question. Elara looked down at her hands. Yes, because you are an orc. Yes. Judith sat on the edge of the bed and patted the space beside her. Elara sat, her spine straight with old habits of caution. Can I tell you something? Judith asked. Of course. When Marcus was 7 years old, he brought home a wolf cub he found in the woods. Its mother had been killed by hunters. That cub was half-starved and wild, and everyone in the village said we should put it down before it grew large enough to be dangerous. Judith smiled at the memory. But Marcus saw something worth saving. He fed that cub by hand, slept in the barn with it, taught it to trust. By the time it was grown, it was the gentlest creature you ever saw. It lived with us for 12 years, and when it finally died of old age, Marcus wept for a week. Elara was not sure what to say. My son sees clearly, Judith said gently. He always has. When everyone else sees danger or strangeness, Marcus sees the truth underneath. If he loves you, it is because you are worth loving, and if you love him, then you are already family. The rest is just details. The tears Elara had been fighting finally spilled over. She wiped at them furiously, embarrassed. Judith pulled her close in another of those encompassing embraces. You are safe here, she said quietly. You are wanted here. You can stop being afraid. Elara let herself be held, let herself believe for the first time that Marcus had told her the truth about his family. Dinner that evening was a loud, chaotic affair around a massive oak table. 7 adults and 1 small child created enough conversation to fill a room twice the size. Elara sat beside Marcus, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of warmth directed at her. Margaret wanted to know everything about how they had met. Ruth asked shy questions about orc customs, genuinely curious rather than critical. David discussed the mill's operations with Marcus, while simultaneously preventing Peter from throwing food at the dogs sleeping by the hearth. Judith moved between kitchen and table like a general directing troops, making sure everyone's plate stayed full. Marcus's hand found Elara's under the table, squeezing gently. She squeezed back, grateful for the anchor. "Mother has been planning your wedding since Marcus first mentioned you," Ruth said, passing a bowl of roasted vegetables. "She has sketched 17 different arrangements for the ceremony." 18, Judith corrected from the kitchen doorway. "I had a new idea this morning." "We do not have to do anything elaborate," Elara said quickly. "Something simple would be nonsense," Judith said. "You only get married once. It should be memorable." "As long as it is better than David's wedding," Margaret said with a grin. "Remember, the priest was drunk and pronounced us man and goat." "He was not drunk," David protested. "He was old and could not see his own notes." "He was drunk," Margaret said firmly. "He smelled like a distillery." "The vows still counted," David said, barely. Margaret turned to Elara. "My point is, your wedding will be much better, probably." Despite her lingering nervousness, Elara laughed. Marcus smiled at the sound, his eyes warm. "See," he said quietly, just for her. "I told you." After dinner, Elara helped Ruth and Margaret clean the dishes while the men took Peter outside to look at the stars. Judith had disappeared somewhere, muttering about linens. "You are not what I expected," Margaret said, scrubbing a pot with vigorous efficiency. Elara's hands stilled in the washing water. "No, I thought you would be fiercer somehow. Marcus described you like you were some kind of warrior goddess who could break mountains." Margaret grinned. "You seem rather normal to me, in a good way." "I am not very fierce," Elara admitted. "That is probably good," Ruth said. "Marcus is fierce enough when he needs to be. You balance each other." "You think so, I know so." Ruth dried a plate carefully. "I have never seen my brother as happy as he has been since he met you. He used to be so," she hesitated. "Distant," Margaret finished. "Even before Father died, Marcus kept himself separate somehow, like he was here but not really here, if that makes sense." "I noticed that," Elara said carefully. Even now, with his family's obvious love surrounding him, Marcus held something back. She had felt it in their private moments together, a shadow he would not let her touch, a grief he carried alone. "He is better with you," Ruth said. "More present. Mother noticed it too." They worked in comfortable silence for a while. Elara found herself relaxing into the rhythm of it, the simple domesticity of washing dishes with women who treated her like she belonged. "Can I ask you something?" Margaret said eventually. "Yes." "Are you happy, truly happy with Marcus?" Elara met her eyes. "More happy than I knew how to be." "He is," she searched for words. "He is everything good I did not know existed," Margaret smiled. "Good. That is what I wanted to hear." She handed Elara another pot. "Welcome to the family, sister." The words settled into Elara's chest like warmth spreading from a hearth fire. That night, lying in the comfortable bed Judith had prepared, Elara stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of the day. Every fear she had carried to this house had proven hollow. The Irving family had not merely accepted her, they had welcomed her with open arms and genuine joy. So why did Marcus still seem like he was holding something back? She had seen it during dinner, in the way his smiles never quite reached the deepest parts of his eyes when he looked at his mother. She had heard it in his voice when David mentioned the farmland, a tightness that suggested old pain. There was a wound here, something unhealed, and Elara did not yet understand its shape. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Judith entered, carrying a cup of tea. "I thought you might like something to help you sleep," she said. "Strange beds can be difficult." "Thank you." Elara accepted the cup, breathing in the scent of chamomile and honey. Judith sat in the chair by the window. "I wanted to ask if you are all right. Today was probably overwhelming." "It was," Elara admitted, "but in the best possible way. I am glad." Judith smiled. "I also wanted to apologize." "For what?" "For whatever stories you heard about human families and orc daughters-in-law, for the fear you carried here, for the fact that you had to be afraid at all." Judith's expression was serious. "The world can be cruel and small-minded. I am sorry you have faced that. It is not your fault." "No, but I am sorry nonetheless." Judith folded her hands in her lap. "I want you to know something, Elara. When Marcus told me he wanted to marry an orc woman, do you know what my first thought was?" Elara shook her head. "I thought, good, someone strong enough to stand beside him." Judith's eyes were bright. "Marcus is a good man, but he carries heavy things. He has since he was young. He needs someone who will not break under that weight, someone who will help him carry it." "What things does he carry?" Elara asked quietly. Judith was silent for a long moment. "That is his story to tell when he is ready. But I will say this: my husband died 3 years ago, and I think Marcus believes it was somehow his fault." "Why would he think that?" "Because they argued before the end. Because Marcus wanted to take over the mill fully, to buy it outright rather than waiting for inheritance. His father saw it as impatience, as rejection. They said terrible things to each other." Judith's voice was soft with old grief. "And then his father's heart gave out, and there was no chance to take any of it back." Lara's chest tightened. "I am so sorry. Marcus has not forgiven himself. And I think he holds himself apart from us now because he is afraid that his love damages things, that getting too close will lead to more loss." Judith met Elara's eyes. "But you broke through that wall somehow. You reached him, and I am grateful beyond words." "He reached me first," Elara said. "I was the one with walls." "Then you are well matched." Judith stood, smoothing her skirts. "Get some rest, dear one. Tomorrow we begin planning a wedding." After she left, Elara lay awake for a long time, thinking about the man she loved and the pain he carried in silence. The next morning, Elara woke to the sound of chickens and distant voices. She dressed quickly, braiding her hair in the simple style she preferred, and went downstairs to find the kitchen already alive with activity. Judith was kneading bread dough with practiced efficiency. "Good morning, sweetheart. There is porridge on the stove and fresh eggs if you want them." "The men are already out in the fields. Can I help with anything? Can you cook?" "Yes. My mother taught me." "Then you can help me with this bread. We go through 6 loaves a day with this family." Judith gestured to a bowl of dough waiting to be shaped. They worked together in easy silence for a while, their hands moving through the familiar rhythms of shaping and scoring. Elara found the work soothing. "Marcus went to the mill before dawn," Judith said. "He wanted to get an early start on some repairs. He works too hard. He always has. Even as a boy, he could not sit still, always building something, fixing something, proving something." Judith glanced at Elara. "Has he shown you the mill properly?" "Only briefly when we first met." "You should go to him today. Bring him lunch." "He will work straight through if someone does not remind him to eat." Judith smiled. "Besides, I think he would like to show you his domain properly. He is very proud of that mill." An hour later, Elara walked the well-worn path to the mill with a basket of food and a nervous flutter in her chest. The mill sat beside the creek, a solid stone structure with a large water wheel turning steadily in the current. She could hear the grinding of stone on stone from inside. the mechanical heartbeat of grain becoming flour. She found Marcus on the second floor, stripped to his shirt sleeves and covered in a fine layer of flour dust. He was adjusting something on the millstone apparatus, his brow furrowed in concentration. "You are going to turn into flour if you keep this up," Elara said from the doorway. Marcus looked up and his whole face transformed with his smile. "Elara, I did not expect you. Your mother sent me with food and instructions to make sure you eat it. She worries too much. She worries the right amount." Elara set the basket on a relatively clean surface. "Can you take a break, for you, always?" Marcus wiped his hands on a rag and came to her, pulling her into a kiss that tasted of flour and the mint he chewed while working. "How are you? Was your first night comfortable?" "Very. Your family is wonderful, Marcus. I told you they would be." "You did. I should have believed you." She studied his face, looking for the shadows Judith had mentioned. "Can you show me how the mill works? Really show me." His eyes lit up the way they always did when he talked about his work. For the next hour, he walked her through every part of the operation, explaining the mechanisms with an enthusiasm that made her heart swell. He showed her how the water turned the wheel, how the wheel turned the gears, how the gears turned the stones that ground wheat into flour. He showed her the different grades of grind, the way to adjust for moisture and grain type, the art hidden inside the mechanical. "My grandfather built this mill," Marcus said, running his hand along the stone wall. "My father expanded it, and he hesitated. You made it yours," Elara finished. "I tried to. Father did not see it that way." The shadow passed over his face again, quick but unmistakable. "Marcus, we should eat," he said, changing the subject with obvious deliberation. "I am starving." They sat together on the loading dock, legs dangling over the edge, eating bread and cheese while the water wheel turned steadily behind them. The autumn sun was warm on Elara's shoulders, and the creek bubbled pleasantly over its stones. "Can I ask you something?" Elara said. "Anything." "Why do you hold back with your family?" Marcus was quiet for a long time. "I do not know what you mean." "Yes, you do." She spoke gently without accusation. "They love you so much, Marcus. Your mother, your sisters, David, they love you fiercely, but you keep a distance. I feel it." "I think they feel it too." He stared at the water, his jaw tight. "I do not mean to, I know, but you do it anyway. It is complicated. Then help me understand." Marcus set down his half-eaten bread, his appetite apparently fled. "When my father was dying, we were not speaking. We had fought about the mill, about money, about 100 stupid things that do not matter now. And I was so angry at him, so determined to prove I was right, that I did not go see him even when he got sick." His voice was rough. "By the time I swallowed my pride, he was already gone. I never got to tell him I was sorry. I never got to." He stopped, his throat working. Elara took his hand, threading their fingers together. "I keep thinking that if I had just been less stubborn, less selfish, I would have had more time. He would have known I loved him despite everything. But I stole that chance from both of us." Marcus's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "And now every time I look at my mother, I remember that I hurt her by hurting him. Every time I am with my family, I remember that I failed the most important test. Marcus, that is not, it is true though. I put my pride before my father, and it cost me everything that matters." Elara shifted to face him fully, gripping both his hands now. "Listen to me. Grief is not a debt you pay alone. Your father made choices too. He was stubborn too. The fight belonged to both of you. But I should have been the bigger person. Why? Because you are young, because you loved him. That is not how love works, Marcus. Love does not make us perfect, it makes us human." She squeezed his hands hard. "You made a mistake, a painful, terrible mistake. But you are still here, and so is your family. You still have time to love them the way you wanted to love him. It does not feel like enough. It never does, but it is all any of us have. Elara leaned her forehead against his. Let them love you, Marcus. Let yourself love them back without holding pieces in reserve. That is how you honor your father, by living fully instead of punishing yourself forever. Marcus pulled her close, burying his face in her shoulder. She felt the shudder run through him, felt the tears he finally let fall soak into her dress. She held him while he cried, there on the loading dock of his mill with the water wheel turning and the autumn sun warm on their backs. I do not know how to forgive myself, he whispered. Then let me help you, she whispered back. They sat there for a long time, holding each other while the creek sang its endless song below. That evening, a neighbor arrived at the farmhouse with troubling news. Elara was helping Ruth shell peas on the front porch when the man rode up, his face grim. Evening, Mistress Irving, he said, dismounting. Is your eldest home? Marcus is at the mill, Judith said, appearing in the doorway. What is wrong, Thomas? Thomas twisted his hat in his hands. There is going to be a meeting tomorrow night at the village hall, about the creek. Elara felt Marcus tense beside her. He had returned from the mill shortly before, cleaned up but still quiet from their earlier conversation. What about the creek? Marcus asked. The Talbot family is claiming they have rights to divert it. They want to run a channel to their orchards, say they have legal documents proving their grandfather was promised the water. That is ridiculous, Judith said sharply. The creek has fed this land and the mill for 3 generations. There are no documents. They are producing something, Thomas said. The magistrate is taking it seriously enough to call a hearing. I thought you should know before tomorrow. After Thomas left, the family gathered in the kitchen with troubled faces. The creek did not just water the farmland, it powered the mill that provided income for the entire family. Without the full flow, the mill would slow to a trickle of productivity. This is Victor Talbot's doing, David said darkly. He has wanted this land since father died. He offered to buy us out last year, Margaret added. When we refused, he was furious. Marcus stood by the window, his shoulders rigid. Father would have known what to do. The words fell into silence. Judith's face softened with pain. Marcus, it is true, though. His voice was flat. Father knew all the old agreements, all the boundaries. He kept every document, every deed. I do not even know where half of them are. The papers are in the study, Judith said, in your father's desk. Then I will look through them tonight. Marcus turned toward the door. Wait, Elara said. You should not do this alone. It is my responsibility. It is your family's responsibility. Let us help. For a moment, Marcus looked like he would refuse. Then his shoulders sagged slightly. All right. They spent the next 3 hours in the study, a cramped room lined with shelves and dominated by a massive oak desk. Marcus sat in his father's chair with visible discomfort while the others searched through drawers and boxes. Here, Ruth said, pulling out a leather folder. These look like property surveys. And these are contracts from the mill, David added, going back 40 years. Marcus spread the documents across the desk, his eyes scanning the faded ink with increasing frustration. There is nothing here about water rights, just standard property boundaries. Father must have kept them somewhere else, Judith said. She stood in the corner of the room, her hands folded, her face drawn. Elara realized this must be painful for her, seeing her children in her dead husband's space, searching through his things. Mother, Elara said gently, you should rest. We can keep looking. I am fine, dear. But she was not fine. None of them were fine. The room felt heavy with old ghosts and new fears. Maybe the documents are at the mill, Marcus said. Father used to keep business papers there sometimes. Then we will look tomorrow, Margaret said firmly. It is late and we are all exhausted. We will think better in the morning. Reluctantly, they dispersed. Elara waited until the others had gone before approaching Marcus, who still sat at the desk staring at the scattered papers. "Come to bed," she said softly. "I should keep looking." "You should rest. You cannot solve this tonight." Marcus rubbed his eyes. "If Father were here, he is not here. You are, and you are doing everything you can. It does not feel like enough." Elara crouched beside the chair, taking his hand. "This is not your fault, Marcus. The Talbots are trying to take advantage. That is on them, not you. But I should have been more prepared. I should have learned more from Father while I had the chance. Instead, I was too busy fighting with him to pay attention to the things that mattered." "Stop." Elara's voice was firm. "This is grief talking, not truth. You are a good man doing his best with an impossible situation. That is all anyone can ask." Marcus looked at her, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and emotion. "How are you so certain?" "Because I love you, and because I see you clearly." She stood, pulling him up with her. "Come. Tomorrow we will find the documents. Tomorrow we will face the Talbots. Tonight you need to sleep." He let her lead him upstairs to his room, let her hold him in the narrow bed until his breathing evened out into sleep. But Elara lay awake, her mind turning over the problem. The next morning she found Judith in the kitchen before anyone else was awake. "Could not sleep?" Judith asked, setting a kettle on the stove. "I was thinking about the creek, about the Talbots. Unpleasant thoughts for such an early hour." Elara hesitated, then said, "Tell me about Marcus's father. Tell me about the kind of man he was." Judith was quiet for a moment, measuring tea leaves into a pot. "He was proud, stubborn. He loved his family fiercely, but he was not always good at showing it. He and Marcus were very alike in that way, which is probably why they clashed so often." "Did he keep good records?" Obsessively. "Every transaction, every agreement, every conversation that mattered, he wrote it all down." Judith poured hot water over the tea. "But he was also paranoid about fire. He never kept important documents in one place. Where else might he have put them? The mill, perhaps." Or Judith paused. "There is a lockbox in the barn. He kept what he called his essential papers there, things he wanted to survive even if the house burned down. Have you looked in it?" "Not since he died. I could not bring myself to go through his things." Elara stood. "Will you show me?" They went to the barn together as the sun rose over the fields. Inside, past the stalls and equipment, Judith led Elara to a storage room. Behind a stack of old crates sat an iron lockbox. "He kept the key in his boot," Judith said softly. "I found it when we prepared him for burial. I put it in here." She reached for a small shelf and pulled down a key on a leather cord. The lock opened smoothly. Inside were documents in careful folders, each labeled in precise handwriting. Elara and Judith spread them across an old work table. "Here," Elara said after several minutes of searching. "Look at this." It was a water rights agreement dated 40 years prior, signed by the regional magistrate and witnessed by 3 landowners. It explicitly granted the Irving family perpetual access to the full flow of the creek for agricultural and industrial purposes. "This is it," Judith breathed. "This is what we need." "There is more." Elara pulled out another document. A survey map showing the creek boundaries. And a letter from the Talbot family's grandfather explicitly acknowledging the Irving water rights. They stared at each other. "We have to tell Marcus," Judith said. They found him already up, pacing the kitchen with barely controlled anxiety. When he saw the documents, relief washed over his face so completely that Elara's heart ached. "Where did you find these?" he asked. "Your father's lockbox in the barn," Judith said. Elara thought to look there. Marcus looked at Elara with something like wonder. "Thank you. Thank your mother. She knew where your father kept important things." "No," Judith said firmly. "Thank your father. He prepared for this exact situation. He protected his family even after he was gone." Marcus's hand trembled slightly as he held the documents. "I wish I could tell him I am sorry." "Then tell him now," Judith said gently. "In your heart, he will hear you." That evening the family gathered at the village hall for the hearing. The magistrate, a stern man named Harold Bennett, presided over the packed room. The Talbot family sat on one side with their lawyer, confident and smug. The Irvings sat on the other, with Elara beside Marcus and the precious documents in a leather case. Victor Talbot was a florid man in his 50s with cold eyes and an expensive coat. He presented his case first. Producing what he claimed was a letter from his grandfather stating that the Irving family had promised to share water rights in exchange for help building the original mill. "As you can see, Magistrate," the Talbot lawyer said smoothly, "there is a clear historical precedent for my client's claim." Magistrate Bennett examined the letter with a frown. "This is dated 30 years ago. Do you have anything more recent?" "The agreement stands regardless of date," the lawyer said. "Perhaps," Bennett said. "Mr. Irving, do you have a response?" Marcus stood, and Elara saw his hands shake slightly as he opened the case, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "I do, Magistrate. First, I have the original water rights agreement, signed by your predecessor and witnessed by 3 landowners, granting my family exclusive access to the creek." He laid out the document. Victor Talbot's face darkened. "Second, I have a letter from Victor Talbot's grandfather himself, written 32 years ago, explicitly acknowledging and respecting those water rights." Marcus placed the second document on the magistrate's desk. "And third," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger, "I have detailed survey maps showing the exact boundaries of our property and the creek's course through it. All of these documents were maintained by my father, who understood the importance of protecting what his family had built." Bennett examined the papers carefully. The room had gone very quiet. "These appear authentic," Bennett said finally, "and they predate the Talbot claim by a decade." He looked at Victor Talbot. "Do you have any evidence that supersedes these documents?" The Talbot lawyer shuffled papers frantically. We were told, you were told incorrectly," Bennett said. "The Irving family's water rights are clearly established and legally sound. This hearing is concluded. The creek remains under Irving control." Victor Talbot stood so quickly his chair fell over. "This is not over," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "You have not heard the last of this." "Actually, I have," Bennett said coolly. "Unless you can produce evidence that contradicts what Mr. Irving has presented, which I very much doubt exists, I suggest you accept this outcome gracefully, Mr. Talbot." Talbot stormed out, his lawyer scrambling after him. The Irvings sat in stunned silence for a moment. Then Margaret started laughing, a bright, wild sound of relief. David clapped Marcus on the shoulder. Ruth hugged her mother. The handful of neighbors who had come to support them offered congratulations, but Marcus stood still, looking down at the documents spread on the table. Elara moved to his side. "You did it," she said softly. "Father did it," Marcus said. "He knew this would happen someday. He prepared for it. He protected us." His voice cracked. "And I spent his last year fighting with him instead of thanking him." Judith appeared on his other side. "Oh, my darling boy, he knew you loved him. He never doubted that." "How can you be sure?" "Because he told me." Judith took Marcus's hand. "A few days before he died, when you were not there, he said to me, 'Marcus will be a better steward of this land than I ever was. He has the vision I lacked.' I just wish I could tell him I was wrong without swallowing my damn pride." She smiled through tears. "You are more alike than either of you ever wanted to admit." Marcus's composure broke. He pulled his mother into a fierce embrace, shoulders shaking with long-delayed grief. Judith held him, murmuring soft comfort, while the rest of the family gathered close around them. Elara stepped back slightly, giving them space, her heart full to bursting. This was what she had come here fearing, a family that would reject her. Instead, she had found a family learning to heal itself, and somehow she had become part of that healing. Margaret caught her eye and smiled, holding out a hand. Elara took it, and Margaret pulled her into the family circle, into the embrace that held them all. They walked home together through the autumn evening, tired but lighter than they had been in years. Marcus held Elara's hand the whole way, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Thank you," he said quietly when they fell behind the others slightly. "For what? For making me face this. For helping me see what I was doing to myself and my family." He stopped, turning to face her fully. "I have been living in the past, in guilt and grief. I forgot how to be present, but you reminded me. You brought me back." "Your family brought you back," Elara said. "I just gave you a push." "It was the push I needed." He cupped her face in his hands. "I love you, Elara Korven. I love you for seeing through my walls. I love you for being brave enough to come here despite your fears. I love you for loving me when I barely knew how to love myself." Elara's eyes stung with happy tears. "I love you too, Marcus Irving. I love your stubborn pride and your gentle heart and the way you see the best in people even when they cannot see it themselves." He kissed her there on the road, soft and deep and full of promise. "Let us get married soon," he said when they broke apart. "I do not want to wait." "Neither do I." They caught up with the family, and when Judith heard their decision, she immediately began planning out loud, her mind already leaping to flowers and food and how many chairs they would need. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Judith threw herself into wedding planning with the focus of a military general. Margaret and Ruth helped Elara sew a wedding dress from ivory linen, adding delicate embroidery in green thread that matched Elara's skin. David and Marcus repaired the old barn and strung it with lanterns for the reception. Peter, delighted to be included, helped his grandfather's old dog steal pastries from the cooling racks. Elara wrote to her own family, inviting them to the wedding. Her mother and 2 brothers arrived a week before the ceremony, nervous and uncertain. But Judith welcomed them with the same fierce warmth she had shown Elara, and within a day her mother was helping in the kitchen, and her brothers were working alongside David in the fields. "Your human is good," Elara's mother said one evening, watching Marcus and David repair a fence together. "His family is good. You chose well, daughter." "I know," Elara said, her heart full. The wedding was planned for the day before the harvest feast, when the fields were golden and the weather still held warm. Neighbors from miles around were invited. Even Magistrate Bennett agreed to attend, curious to see the union that had caused such a stir in the community. The morning of the wedding, Elara woke to Ruth and Margaret bursting into her room with breakfast and flowers and barely contained excitement. "You cannot see Marcus until the ceremony," Ruth said firmly. "It is bad luck." "I do not believe in bad luck," Elara said. "Well, humor us anyway," Margaret said, setting down a tray laden with fresh bread and honey. "Besides, we need hours to make you beautiful." "I am not sure I can be beautiful." Both sisters stopped and stared at her. "Elara," Margaret said slowly, "you are already beautiful. We are just going to make you magnificent." They dressed her in the ivory gown, braided her hair with autumn flowers, touched her cheeks with berry stain that made her green skin glow. When they finally let her look in the mirror, Elara barely recognized herself. She looked like someone worthy of being loved, someone worthy of joy. "Perfect," Ruth whispered. The ceremony was held in the field beside the farmhouse, where a simple arch woven with vines and late-blooming roses stood against the backdrop of the golden wheat. Chairs had been set in rows, and every seat was full. Elara's hands trembled as her brothers walked her down the aisle between the guests. Then she saw Marcus waiting for her at the arch, and everything else faded away. He wore his finest clothes, his dark hair combed back, his eyes bright with emotion. When he saw her, his whole face transformed with wonder and love so pure it took her breath away. Magistrate Bennett performed the ceremony, his stern face softening as he spoke the traditional words. But Elara barely heard them. She was lost in Marcus's eyes, in the warm strength of his hands holding hers. "I, Marcus Irving, take you, Elara Korven, to be my wife," Marcus said, his voice clear and steady. "I promise to love you in sunlight and shadow. I promise to stand beside you in joy and in sorrow. I promise to see you truly, always, and to never let fear or pride come between us. This I swear before all who witness us here." Elara's voice shook when she spoke her own vows. "I, Elara Korven, take you, Marcus Irving, to be my husband. I promise to love you with all the fierceness in my heart. I promise to help you carry your burdens and celebrate your joys. I promise to be brave enough to let you love me, and to love you in return without holding back. This I swear before all who witness us here." Bennett smiled. "Then by the authority vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Marcus, you may kiss your bride." Marcus pulled Elara close and kissed her to the sound of cheering and applause. When they broke apart, both laughing and crying at once, Judith was the first to reach them. "My daughter," she said to Elara, pulling her into that same fierce embrace she had given the first day they met. "Welcome to the family forever." Elara's mother embraced Marcus next, speaking to him in the Orcish tongue. "Protect her heart as she protects yours," she said. And Marcus nodded seriously, even though he did not understand the words. The feast that followed was magnificent. Tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, fresh bread, vegetable dishes, and pies of every variety. Musicians played while children danced and adults drank toasts to the new couple. The sun set in gold and pink splendor, and the lanterns in the barn came to life like earthbound stars. As the evening deepened, Marcus stood and raised his cup. The crowd quieted, sensing something important. "I want to thank you all for being here," Marcus said, "for celebrating with us, for supporting my family through difficult times." He paused, his eyes finding Judith in the crowd. "But mostly, I want to say something I should have said a long time ago." Judith's hand went to her mouth. "Father," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion, "I know you cannot hear me, but I need to say this anyway. I was wrong. I was stubborn and proud, and I put my need to be right ahead of my need to love you. I am sorry. I am sorry I wasted our last year together fighting instead of listening. I am sorry I never told you how much I admired what you built, how much I wanted to make you proud." Tears ran down his face unchecked. "But I promise you now, here in front of everyone who matters, that I will honor what you gave us. I will protect this family and this land. I will love them the way you taught me to love, even when I was too stubborn to realize you were teaching me. And I will try every day to be the man you believed I could be." The silence that followed was profound. Then Judith rose and went to her son, wrapping him in her arms while she wept. One by one, his sisters joined the embrace, and David, and even little Peter, who did not fully understand but knew something important was happening. Elara watched through tears of her own, her heart so full it felt like it might break open with joy. When the family finally separated, Marcus turned to Elara and held out his hand. She took it, and he pulled her close. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair, "for saving me from myself." "Thank you for letting me," she whispered back. They danced together as the musicians played, turning slow circles under the lantern light. Around them, the people they loved most in the world laughed and celebrated and loved them back. As the night grew late and guests began to depart with full stomachs and happy hearts, Judith caught Elara alone for a moment. "I knew from the moment I saw you," she said, "that you were exactly what this family needed, what Marcus needed, what I needed." She kissed Elara's forehead. "You are a blessing, sweet girl, never doubt that." "I was so afraid when I came here," Elara admitted, "afraid you would hate me for what I am." "What you are is loved," Judith said firmly. "Remember that. Whatever the world says, whatever small-minded people think, you are loved here, completely. Forever." Marcus appeared at Elara's side, slipping an arm around her waist. "Mother, are you stealing my wife?" "Just borrowing her," Judith said with a smile. "But I am giving her back now. Take care of each other, you two." She left them standing together in the barn doorway, watching the last of the guests make their way home under the stars. "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked softly. "I am thinking about fear," Elara said. "About how I almost let it keep me from all of this. From you, from your family, from this happiness. I am glad you were braver than your fear. I am glad you were patient with me." He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Elara Irving," he said, testing out her new name. "My wife." "Marcus Irving," she said. "My husband." They kissed in the doorway while the autumn wind whispered through the wheat fields, and the mill wheel turned steadily in the creek below. Behind them, the barn was warm with lantern light and the lingering joy of celebration. Ahead of them, a life stretched out full of ordinary days and extraordinary love. The harvest feast the next day brought even more people to the Irving farm. It was tradition in these parts after the wedding came the harvest celebration, where everyone who worked the land gathered to give thanks for another year survived and another winter prepared for. Tables stretched across the yard, laden with food brought by every family for miles. Children ran shrieking between the adults, playing games that had been played for generations. The older folks sat in the shade and told stories about harvests past. Elara moved through the celebration with Marcus at her side, accepting congratulations and well wishes from people she had never met. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with barely concealed surprise, but no one was unkind. Marcus's hand never left the small of her back, a constant reassuring presence. "Mrs. Irving," a voice called out, and Elara turned to see an elderly woman approaching with a basket. "I brought you some preserves. My own recipe passed down from my grandmother. It is tradition to gift the new bride something for her household." Elara accepted the basket, touched beyond words. "Thank you. That is very kind." "You have a good man there," the woman said, nodding at Marcus. "His father was a good man too, stubborn as they come, but good. I am glad to see his son finding happiness." After she left, Elara looked up at Marcus. "Your father was well loved here." "He was," Marcus said quietly. "I forget that sometimes. I focus so much on our problems that I forget he was more than just my father. He was a neighbor, a friend, a pillar of this community." "You are becoming the same," Elara said. "They respect you. They are happy for you. Because of you, you make me better." "We make each other better," she corrected. The afternoon drifted into evening, and as the sun began to set, Magistrate Bennett stood and called for attention. "Before we conclude this fine celebration," he announced, "I have one more piece of business. Marcus Irving, would you join me, please?" Marcus looked puzzled but complied, making his way to where Bennett stood. "As most of you know," Bennett continued, "there was recently a dispute over water rights that could have caused significant harm to the Irving family and, by extension, to all of us who depend on their mill. That dispute was resolved because Marcus Irving was prepared with documentation and evidence that protected not only his family's interests, but the integrity of our community's agreements." People nodded, murmuring agreement. "In recognition of his stewardship and his father's legacy." Bennett said. I am officially recognizing the Irving family as the permanent conservators of the creek and its tributaries. This is not merely water rights, this is a formal acknowledgement that they hold this resource in trust for the community. It comes with responsibilities, yes, but also with protections under regional law. No future claims can be brought against the creek without going through a full regional tribunal. Marcus's eyes widened. Magistrate, I do not know what to say. Say you will continue your father's work. Say you will protect what he built and what you are building now. Bennett smiled. Say you will keep making excellent flour so my wife stops complaining that no other miller compares. Laughter rippled through the crowd. I will, Marcus said, his voice strong. I promise. As the applause died down and people returned to their conversations, Marcus made his way back to Elara. His eyes were bright with emotion. Did you know about this? He asked. No. But I am so proud of you. He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. I feel like I can finally breathe, like a weight I have been carrying for 3 years just lifted. Your father would be proud too, Elara said softly. I think maybe he is, Marcus said. Wherever he is, I think he knows I am trying. That night, after all the guests had departed and the cleanup was complete, the family gathered around the kitchen table for a quiet supper. Everyone was exhausted but happy, filled with the bone-deep satisfaction that comes from a celebration well executed. That was a perfect wedding, Ruth said, resting her head on her arms. Everything went exactly right. Except when Peter knocked over the punch bowl, Margaret reminded her. That was before the ceremony. It does not count. It counts to the people who had to clean it up, David said, but he was smiling. Judith brought a pot of tea to the table and began pouring cups for everyone. I have something to say, she announced. The table quieted. These past few weeks have been difficult in some ways, Judith said. We faced a threat to our home, we dealt with old grief, we spoke of painful things, but we also grew closer. We remembered how to be a family instead of just people living in the same house. She looked at each of her children in turn, then at Elara. Elara, you came here afraid we would reject you. Instead, you gave us the greatest gift. You helped Marcus find his way back to us. You reminded us all that love is not something to hoard or protect, but something to give freely and often. Judith raised her cup. To my daughter Elara, who was brave enough to love my stubborn son and wise enough to see what he needed most. To Elara, the family chorused, raising their cups. Elara felt tears prick her eyes again. I did not do anything special, I just loved him. That is the most special thing of all, Judith said gently. Marcus took Elara's hand under the table, squeezing tight. I have something to say too, he said. Everyone turned to him. I have been thinking about the mill, about expanding it. David leaned forward with interest. How so? We could add a second stone for cornmeal. There is demand for it, and the creek has flow enough to power another wheel if we build it upstream. Marcus's eyes lit up the way they always did when he talked about his work. We could also start milling oats. Maybe even build a small kiln for drying grain. That would require significant investment, David said, but he sounded intrigued rather than dismissive. It would. But the magistrate's recognition gives us security. We could take a loan against the property without fear of someone trying to seize it, and if we expand, we could hire help, maybe even bring on an apprentice. You have been planning this, Elara said. Marcus smiled at her. I have been thinking about the future. About building something that will last, something I can pass on to our children someday. The table went quiet. Elara's cheeks warmed, knowing everyone was thinking about the implications of that statement. Well, Margaret said finally, grinning. I suppose we should start preparing for more family members then. Margaret, Judith said warningly, but she was smiling. They talked late into the night, planning and dreaming and imagining the future. Elara listened more than she spoke, content to absorb the warmth of the family she had married into. This was what she had feared losing, this exact thing. Connection, belonging, the simple joy of being welcomed and wanted. When they finally went upstairs to the room that was now theirs together, Marcus pulled Elara into his arms and held her close. "Thank you," he said for what felt like the 100th time. "You have to stop thanking me," Elara said, smiling against his chest. "I do not think I can. Every time I look at you, I remember how close I came to losing this, to losing myself." He tilted her chin up so he could see her face. "You saved me, Elara. Maybe I saved you too, a little bit, but mostly you saved me." "Then we are even," she said, "not even close. I will be thanking you for the rest of our lives. Then I will be telling you to stop for the rest of our lives." He kissed her, slow and deep and full of promise. Outside, the autumn wind rustled through the wheat fields. Inside, the house creaked and settled around them, warm and safe and full of love. The winter that followed was mild and productive. Marcus threw himself into planning the mill expansion with David's help. They drew sketches, calculated costs, consulted with builders from the nearest town. Elara worked alongside Judith and her sisters-in-law, learning the rhythms of the household and finding her place within it. She discovered she had a talent for numbers and began helping Marcus with the mill's accounts. She reorganized his record-keeping system, creating clear ledgers that tracked expenses and income with precision their father would have admired. Marcus was endlessly grateful, admitting he had always struggled with paperwork. "You make sense of what looks like chaos to me," he said one evening, watching her work. "How do you do that?" "It is just organization," Elara said. "Everything in its proper place, every number telling part of a story. See, you make it sound simple. To me, it is just numbers being difficult." She laughed. "Then it is good we complement each other. You understand grain and machines. I understand ledgers and patterns. Together we are competent." "Together we are unstoppable," Marcus corrected, kissing the top of her head. In midwinter, Judith fell ill with a fever that would not break. For 3 frightening days, she burned with heat while the family took turns sitting with her, cooling her forehead with damp cloths and coaxing her to drink water. Elara sat vigil through one long night, watching Judith's fitful sleep and praying to gods she was not entirely sure existed. She thought about what it would mean to lose this woman who had welcomed her so completely, who had shown her what maternal love looked like when it was given freely and without condition. "You cannot leave yet," Elara whispered to the sleeping woman. "I have only just found you. We have so much time left, please." Judith's eyes fluttered open. "Elara, I am here. Do you need anything? Water, another blanket, just company." Judith's voice was weak but clear. "Talk to me. Tell me something happy." Elara thought for a moment. "Marcus wants to name the first addition to the mill after his father. The new grain kiln, he wants to call it the Thomas Irving Memorial Kiln." Judith's eyes filled with tears. He does. He says his father deserves to be remembered for what he built, not for their argument. He says it is time to honor the legacy instead of mourning the loss." "That boy," Judith whispered. "That good, stubborn, wonderful boy. He learned from the best," Elara said gently. "His father would be so proud. I wish," Judith's voice caught, "I wish Thomas could see what Marcus has become. The man he has grown into." "Maybe he can," Elara said. "Maybe somewhere he knows." Judith squeezed her hand weakly. "Thank you for taking care of my son, for loving him so well. He makes it easy." "No, he does not. He is complicated and damaged and carries more guilt than any one person should. But you love him anyway. That is not easy. That is brave." The fever broke the next morning. Judith woke clear-eyed and asking for breakfast, and the whole house seemed to exhale in relief. Marcus hugged Elara so tightly she could barely breathe. "I do not know what I would have done if we lost her too," he said against her hair. "We did not lose her. She is strong. She will be fine. Because you took care of her. We all took care of her. That is what families do." By spring, Judith had recovered fully and was back to managing the household with her usual efficiency. The mill expansion had progressed through the planning stages and into actual construction. Marcus hired 3 men from the village to help with the heavy work, and the sound of hammering and sawing became the constant backdrop to daily life. Elara discovered she was pregnant in early spring. She told Marcus one evening as they walked beside the creek, watching the new mill wheel being installed upstream. "You are certain?" he asked, his face cycling through shock and joy and fear in rapid succession. "Very certain. The midwife confirmed it yesterday." He swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "We are going to have a baby. We are going to be parents. In about 6 months, yes." He set her down carefully, suddenly treating her like she was made of glass. "Should you be walking this much? Should you be working? What does the midwife say you need? She says I should keep living my normal life until I cannot anymore. I am not fragile, Marcus. You are carrying our child. You are the most precious thing in the world." She smiled, touching his cheek. "Then our child is lucky to have a father who cares so much already." They told the family that evening at dinner. Judith cried happy tears and immediately began planning. Margaret and Ruth started arguing about whether it would be a boy or girl and what name would be best. David offered solemn congratulations and started talking about expanding the upstairs to add a nursery. Peter, now 3 years old, seemed baffled by the fuss but pleased to be included in the excitement. "A grandchild," Judith kept saying, wonder in her voice. "I am going to be a grandmother." "You are already a grandmother," Margaret reminded her, pointing at Peter. "Yes, but this is different. This is Marcus's child. This is—" She looked at Elara with such love that Elara had to look away before she started crying. "This is the future continuing. This is hope." As Elara's pregnancy progressed, the mill expansion neared completion. The new wheel turned smoothly, powering the cornmeal stone that Marcus had dreamed of. The kiln stood ready to dry grain, its dedication plaque reading Thomas Irving Memorial Kiln, built in honor of a man who loved his family and his land. Marcus stood before it the day they finished the inscription, his hand resting on the metal plaque. "I hope this makes you proud, Father," he said quietly. Elara stood beside him, her hand in his. "I hope you know I understand now. I understand why you fought so hard to protect this place. I understand the weight of legacy and responsibility, and I promise I will carry it well." The wind rustled through the new leaves on the trees, and Elara could have sworn she felt a warmth in it, like a benediction. The baby came in late summer, arriving with the sunrise on a morning so beautiful it felt like the world itself was celebrating. The labor was long and difficult, but when the midwife finally placed a squalling, red-faced infant in Elara's arms, every moment of pain evaporated into pure joy. "A girl," the midwife announced. "A healthy, strong girl." Marcus, who had paced the hallway for 12 hours, was allowed in to meet his daughter. He approached the bed with trembling steps, his eyes wide with awe. "She is so small," he whispered. "She will grow," Elara said, exhausted but radiant. "Would you like to hold her?" He took the baby with exquisite care, cradling her against his chest like she was made of spun glass. The infant quieted at his touch, her dark eyes opening to stare up at her father's face. "Hello," Marcus said softly. "Hello, little one, I am your father. And I promise you will never doubt that you are loved. I promise you will always know you are wanted. I promise I will be here, every day, to tell you how wonderful you are." Tears ran down his face, dripping onto the baby's blanket. Elara watched him with her heart so full she thought it might burst. This man who had been so afraid of his own capacity for love was drowning in it now, transformed by the tiny life in his arms. "What should we name her?" Marcus asked. They had discussed names for months without deciding. But looking at their daughter now, peaceful in her father's arms with the morning sun streaming through the window, Elara knew. "Lydia," she said. "After your grandmother, the one whose ring you gave me." Marcus looked up, his eyes shining. "Lydia Irving, it is perfect." Judith came in shortly after, having been waiting anxiously downstairs. When she saw her son holding his daughter, she pressed both hands to her mouth and wept. "Oh, Marcus," she said. "Oh, my beautiful boy, look at you. You are a father." "I am terrified," he admitted. "Good. That means you understand how important it is." Judith approached and gently touched the baby's soft hair. "Hello, little Lydia. I am your grandmother, and I am going to spoil you absolutely rotten." Over the next few days, the entire family came to meet the newest Irving. Margaret brought gifts and unsolicited advice about motherhood. Ruth brought flowers and quiet support. David brought Peter, who was simultaneously fascinated and alarmed by the tiny baby. "She very small," Peter observed. "You were that small once," his father told him. "No," Peter said with certainty. "I always big." Even Magistrate Bennett came to pay his respects, bringing an official registration of birth and a silver cup engraved with Lydia's name and birth date. "For her first birthday," he said gruffly. "Every child should have something silver. It is traditional." As summer faded into autumn and the harvest came in golden and generous, Elara settled into motherhood with a mix of exhaustion and wonder. Marcus was an attentive father, waking for nighttime feedings and changing swaddling cloths without complaint. He sang to Lydia in his terrible voice, and the baby seemed to love it, gurgling happily in his arms. "You were right," he told Elara one night as they watched their daughter sleep in the cradle David had built. "We do make each other better. We make each other complete," Elara corrected. The day of the harvest feast arrived again, marking a full year since their wedding. The Irving family hosted the celebration as they had for generations, and this time, Elara moved through the preparations not as a nervous bride, but as a confident member of the family. She held Lydia on her hip while directing the setup of tables, accepting compliments on her beautiful daughter from neighbors who had become friends. No one looked at her green skin with suspicion anymore. No one seemed to remember she had once been an outsider. She was simply Mrs. Irving, Marcus's wife, Lydia's mother, part of the fabric of the community. As evening fell and the feast began in earnest, Marcus once again stood to make a toast. The crowd quieted, remembering last year's emotional speech. "Thank you all for being here," Marcus began. "For celebrating another successful harvest with us. For supporting my family through another year of growth and change." He looked around at the gathered faces, then down at Elara and Lydia sitting at the head table. "Last year, I stood here and spoke to my father's memory. I made peace with the past and promised to honor his legacy. This year, I want to speak to the future." He raised his cup higher. "To my wife, Elara, who taught me that love is not something to fear but something to embrace with both hands and an open heart. To my daughter, Lydia, who shows me every day what it means to be responsible for something infinitely precious. To my mother, who has shown us all what strength and grace look like. To my sisters and brother, who have supported me even when I did not deserve it. And to all of you, our neighbors, our friends, our community who make this life worth living." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "My father built this mill with his hands and his sweat and his stubborn determination. I thought for a long time that I could never measure up to that legacy. But I understand now that legacy is not about being perfect. It is about showing up every day and doing the work. It is about loving fiercely even when you are afraid. It is about building something that will outlast you and trusting that those who come after will care for it as you cared for it. Marcus looked at the new mill wheel turning in the creek, at the kiln bearing his father's name, at the fields golden with wheat. I am proud to continue my father's work. I am proud to expand it. And I am proud to pass it on someday to my daughter and whatever other children we may have. This land, this mill, this community, they are worth fighting for. They are worth building for. And I thank you all for being part of this dream. The applause that followed was thunderous. People stood, raising their cups in salute. Elara watched her husband with tears streaming down her face, marveling at how far he had come from the man who could barely look his mother in the eye a year ago. When Marcus sat back down, he pulled Elara into a deep kiss, heedless of the cheering crowd. "I love you," he said against her lips. "I love you too," she said. "So much." Lydia, nestled between them, made a small noise of protest at being squished. They laughed and separated, both turning their attention to their daughter. "What do you think, little one?" Marcus asked the baby. "Is this a good life?" Lydia grabbed his finger and tried to put it in her mouth, which they took as affirmation. The celebration continued long into the night. Music played, children danced, adults told stories and laughed and enjoyed the fruits of their labor. Elara danced with Marcus, with David, even with Magistrate Bennett, who turned out to be surprisingly light on his feet. She danced with her own brothers, who had come again for the feast and who marveled at how happy their sister had become. "You made the right choice," her older brother said. "This human treats you well." "He treats me like I am the most important person in the world," Elara said. "Because you are," Marcus said, appearing at her side and pulling her close. "To me you are." As the night grew late and guests began to depart, the Irving family gathered one last time around the table. Judith brought out a bottle of wine she had been saving for a special occasion. "I want to make a toast of my own," she said, pouring glasses for everyone. Even Peter got a tiny sip in a cup. "To family," Judith said, raising her glass. "To the family we are born into and the family we choose. To the family that grows and changes and forgives and loves. To all of us together exactly as we are." "To family," they echoed, clinking glasses. Elara looked around the table at these people who had become her whole world. Judith, who had welcomed her with open arms from the first moment. Margaret and Ruth, who had become the sisters she never had. David, who treated her with easy affection and respect. Peter, who called her Auntie Ellie and brought her dandelions. And Marcus, her husband, her partner, her love, who held their daughter with such tenderness it made her heart ache. A year ago, she had stood at the edge of this property ready to run from fear. Now she sat at its heart, surrounded by love so vast and deep, it seemed impossible she had ever lived without it. "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked softly. "I am thinking about fear," Elara said. "About how wrong I was about everything. I thought your family would hate me. I thought I would never belong. I thought I would spend my life apologizing for existing. And now I know that love is bigger than fear. That family is what you make it. That belonging is not something you earn but something you accept when it is freely given." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I am thinking that I am grateful I was brave enough to take that first step, even though I was terrified." "So am I," Marcus said, kissing her temple. "Every single day I am grateful." Lydia fussed slightly, and Elara lifted her from the cradle, rocking her gently. The baby settled against her chest, sighing contentedly. "She will grow up knowing she is loved," Marcus said, watching them. "She will never doubt it for a second." "Neither will any of our other children," Elara said. "Other children," Marcus's eyes lit up. Are you saying not yet, but someday, when the time is right? She smiled at him. I want a full house. I want noise and chaos and love overflowing. I want what you gave me multiplied. Then that is what we will build, Marcus promised. Together. The years that followed brought everything Elara had hoped for and more. 2 more children joined their family, a son they named Thomas after Marcus's father, and another daughter they named Clara after Elara's mother. The mill continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful operations in the region. Marcus trained apprentices who went on to build their own mills, spreading the Irving reputation for quality and fairness. Elara took over the business side completely, her talent for numbers turning the mill from profitable to genuinely wealthy. She invested wisely, buying more land, adding more equipment, creating jobs for the village. She became known throughout the region as a shrewd but fair businesswoman, and the fact that she was an orc became less and less relevant as people learned to see her skills first. Judith lived to see all her grandchildren born and thrived on the chaos of a house full of young ones. She taught them to bake, to garden, to sing the old songs. She told them stories about their grandfather Thomas, making sure they knew the man he had been beyond the mistakes he had made. Margaret and David had 3 more children of their own. Ruth married a kind farmer from the next valley, and brought him into the family with the same warmth Elara had received. The Irving family grew and flourished, a testament to the power of love freely given and gratefully received. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Marcus and Elara stood together beside the creek, watching their children play in the late summer sunshine. Lydia, now 9, was teaching her brothers to skip stones. Thomas, 7, was more interested in catching frogs. Clara, 5, was picking flowers with determined focus. You remember the first time you came here? Marcus asked, taking Elara's hand. Every detail. I was so frightened I could barely breathe. And now I cannot imagine being anywhere else. This is my home. These are my people. This is where I belong. Marcus pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. I was lost before I met you. I did not even know how lost I was. I thought I was fine, but I was just going through motions, keeping everyone at a distance because I was afraid of failing them the way I thought I failed my father. You never failed him, Elara said firmly. You loved him. You learned from him. You built on what he created. That is not failure. That is legacy. I know that now because you taught me. He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. You healed me, Elara. You healed my family. You took our broken pieces and helped us put them back together stronger than before. You did the same for me. I was afraid of being rejected, of never being good enough, of living my whole life as an outsider. You showed me what it feels like to be chosen, to be wanted exactly as I am. They kissed there beside the creek while their children played and the mill wheel turned and the world went on in its beautiful, ordinary way. Mama, Papa, Lydia called out. Thomas caught a frog and it jumped in Clara's hair. They laughed and went to mediate the crisis, their hands still linked, their hearts still full. That evening, the whole family gathered for dinner as they did every night. The table was longer now to accommodate everyone, and the noise level had increased proportionally. But the love remained the same, fierce and constant and freely given. Judith, her hair fully silver now but her eyes still bright, looked around at her family with deep satisfaction. I wish Thomas could see this, she said quietly to Elara, who sat beside her. All of it. What his children have built, what you have brought to this family. Maybe he does, Elara said. Maybe somewhere he is proud. I know he is, Judith said with certainty. Just as I know he would have loved you fiercely, just as we all do. After dinner, after the children were bathed and put to bed with stories and songs, After the house had settled into quiet, Marcus and Elara sat together on the porch watching the stars emerge. "Tell me something," Marcus said. "Do you ever regret it? Marrying me, joining this chaotic family, taking on all the complications that came with it." Elara pretended to think about it. "Well, the complications have been numerous. They have. And the chaos is ongoing, definitely. And I suppose I could have had a quieter life somewhere else. Probably much quieter." She turned to him with a smile. "But I would not trade a single moment, not one. This life, this family, this love, it is everything I never knew I needed, everything I was too afraid to hope for. You and your family did not just accept me, you embraced me. You made me belong, and I will spend the rest of my life grateful for that gift." Marcus kissed her softly. "The gift was mutual. You walked into our lives and made everything better just by being exactly who you are." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the night deepen around them. From inside the house came the sound of one of the children calling out in sleep. Marcus started to rise, but Elara pulled him back down. "They are fine. Let them settle." He relaxed again, pulling her close against his side. "I love you, Elara Irving. I love you too, Marcus Irving. Today, tomorrow, always." The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The creek sang its endless song. The mill wheel turned steadily, powered by water that had flowed here for generations and would flow here for generations more. And in the house behind them, the family that fear had almost prevented slept peacefully, wrapped in love and security and belonging. Elara had walked toward this house a decade ago expecting rejection and finding instead the warmest embrace she had ever known. That embrace had transformed everything: her life, her heart, her understanding of what family could be. She had been afraid, and Marcus's mother had pulled her close and called her daughter. That single act of radical welcome had changed the course of not just Elara's life, but the lives of everyone she touched. Now, sitting in the peaceful dark with her husband's arms around her and her children safe inside, Elara understood what Judith had known from the beginning. Love, when given freely and fiercely, has the power to heal anything. It can bridge any divide, overcome any fear, transform any heart willing to be transformed. She had come here as an outsider. She had become family. And in doing so, she had helped Marcus become the man he was always meant to be: present, loving, unafraid to show his heart. Together they had built something beautiful on the foundation his father had laid, honoring the past while building toward the future. The door creaked open behind them, and Lydia padded out in her nightgown, rubbing her eyes. "I had a bad dream," she said. Marcus scooped her up and settled her between them. "You are safe now, little one." Lydia curled against her father's chest, already half asleep again. Elara stroked her daughter's dark hair, marveling at this small person they had created, this perfect blend of both their heritages, who would never know the fear that had haunted her mother. "Tell me about when you and Mama got married," Lydia mumbled, as she often did when she needed comfort. "Well," Marcus said, settling in to tell the familiar story. "Your Mama was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, but she was very nervous about meeting grandmother." Elara listened to him tell their story, editing out the darkest fears and deepest pain, turning it into the fairy tale their children needed to hear. A story about love conquering fear, about family embracing the stranger, about building something beautiful together. It was their story. And it was true in all the ways that mattered. As Marcus talked and Lydia drifted back to sleep, Elara looked up at the stars and sent a silent thank you to whatever force had given her the courage to take that first terrifying step toward this house, this family, this life. She had been so afraid. And she had been so beautifully, wonderfully wrong about everything. The warmth of that first embrace had never faded. It had only grown, expanding to encompass children and years and all the ordinary miracles that made a life worth living. Judith had pulled her close and called her daughter, and in that moment, everything had changed. Now Elara was the one teaching her children to embrace others without fear, to see past differences to the heart underneath, to give love as freely as it had been given to her. The legacy continued, growing richer with each generation. Marcus finished the story and stood, carrying their sleeping daughter back inside. Elara followed, taking one last look at the peaceful farm spread out under the stars. This was home. This was family. This was everything. And she was no longer afraid.